The Alchemists are a loyalist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes that has operated since at least M33. All details about the chapter's origin, primogeniture and history before this point are unconfirmed. This brings particular attention to the fact that from the first recording of their existence, they were renegades to the Imperium. Up until M40, the chapter was relentlessly hunted by the High Lords of Terror and the Inquisition. Even now, after their redemption, a feature as insignificant as their title continues to bring much suspicion regarding their operating procedures. Both the Adeptus Mechanicus and Adeptus Ministorum have expressed reservations, as alchemy may refer to technological or biological heresy. When faced with such accusations, members of the chapter have been noted to respond with amusement that is uncharacteristic of the Alchemists. While the Imperium denies any knowledge of their origins, there are various rumors regarding the foundation of the chapter. Comparisons have been drawn between the Alchemists and the Regents of War. The Regents of War were a lesser-known second founding successor to the Ultramarines. Their obscurity can be attributed to their absence from the Apocrypha of Davio, as well as their isolationism on the fringes of Segmentum Pacificus. And despite this lack of information, it is widely believed that they were a fleet-based chapter with a preference for ancient war gear from the time of the Great Crusade. Officially, they have been declared destroyed, although the details of when and how this happened are not available. While unsubstantiated, there is a rumor that they were not destroyed at all. Instead, it is speculated that they were among the first to side with the secessionists during the War of the False Primarch. Much like the Regents of War, few records exist on this conflict. What is known for certain is that the earliest available record of the Alchemists was made in 862 M33. Reports of an extremely damaged Vengeance-class cruiser identifying itself as the Changeling issued a distress call in the southern fringes of the Nephilim sector. The ship was incapable of further flight and was left drifting in the void. The Astartes chapter, known as the Death Strike, responded to the distress call, sending a ship of their own and finding the Changeling overrun with warp entities. With the ship near split in two, there was no remaining oxygen within the cruiser. As a result, all of the humans and servitors aboard the vessel had been killed. The survivors are believed to have been approximately 300 Astartes, each protected from the vacuum by their power armor. In addition to this, were various ancient patterns of dreadnought. Upon the evacuation of these Astartes, the Death Strike would subsequently return to their homeworld of Nihilus. When asked to identify themselves, why it was that they had attempted a warp jump in such a damaged vessel, the rescued Marines were taciturn. Soon after arriving on the planet's surface, another Astartes ship would arrive above Nihilus, this one intact, and being in the possession of the Red Talons chapter. It was revealed that the Talons were in pursuit of a group of renegade Astartes. Working under the order of the High Lords of Terror, they seized control of a Dr. Astartes ship, stealing it for their own escape. The Red Talons gave chase alongside the enraged Death Strike. However, they could not prevent them from slipping away into the warp. From this point forward, verifiable dates and sightings of the Alchemists become sporadic. Nonetheless, it is believed that they took to scavenging for resources throughout Ultima Segmentum. Sightings most frequently took place around the Imga monolith for a number of centuries before Imperial forces gradually pushed them to the galactic north. For the better part of their history, most of the Imperium has regarded the chapter as a myth, similar to common beliefs about the Grey Knights. This is due partially on the ambiguity of their origins. The other reason for their fabled status was their necessity of limiting contact with the Imperium. For this reason, the Alchemists largely operated on backwater or isolated worlds. It was said that the Alchemists would appear from out of the Immaterium without warning or ceremony. When deployed, the chapter would fight alone, never contacting the indigenous population of the planets they fought for. Once whatever threat they opposed was dealt with, the mysterious Brotherhood would depart back into the warp before any questions could be asked of them. Tales describing them as Astartes is roughly maintained battle plate, dark grey in color, with bone detailing, bronze shoulder guards, and silver weaponry. The few available pics of the chapter show that their suits were usually Mark III or Mark VII. Additionally, the chapter had various suits of Tartarus and Cataphracti Terminator armor. This use of rare equipment is much of what leads scholars to link these regions of war to the Alchemists, claiming that they are one and the same. An alternative explanation is that the older marks were taken from slain heretic Astartes of the traitor legions. After centuries of nomadically traveling further north, the Alchemists would stumble upon the planet Morrigan. Located on the outer edge of the warpstorm Malfactors, Morrigan was once the forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus. When the storm threatened to consume the planet, the tech priests would abandon the world, leaving behind a small human population. For reasons that are beyond current explanations of science, Morrigan was never fully engulfed by the warp. However, it was difficult to find, unless those searching already knew where it was. After years of scavenging for resources, Chapter Master Rylan Paracelsus conducted it would be a perfect world on which to resupply and hide from the Imperium. Upon their descent to the planet, it was discovered that without tech priests to maintain the machinery, Morrigan had regressed to a feudal world. Ancient manufacturers and refiners now formed fortresses and sanctuaries for the human populations. What had once been polluted deserts became a lush forest that encapsulated most of the world. However, life was anything but easy for the population, as the presence of the Malfactors warp storm greatly influenced the planet. Energy from the rift created an above-average amount of psyches on Morrigan. When untrained, these psyches frequently formed heretical cults and demonic incursion was widespread. However, the primary threat of Morrigan came in the form of ancient Xenos there. Perhaps being roused by the warp storm, a catacomb of Necrons had awoken around 5 months before the Alchemists' arrival. In the time since they woke, 1/3 of the planet's human population had been ruthlessly exterminated. When the chapter made it onto the planet's surface, they would begin a campaign that defined their flexible yet specialized style of warfare. Led by their famously sardonic chapter master, the Alchemists swore to reclaim the world or die trying. The chapter fought as it always had done, without chaplains. Morale was held together by the close bonds of brotherhood between the Astartes. Drop pods of tactical squads and devastators were deployed to surround the advancing lines of Necrons before opening fire upon them. Alchemist favorites of melter weaponry and missile launchers were deployed in the place of plasma guns and flamers. The chapter's many ancient dreadnoughts were awakened to aid the chapter. Contemptor dreadnoughts would crush the mechanical warriors beneath their mighty feet, while the ranged power of the Dorado pattern dreadnought proved effective at downing Necron destroyers. Echoing bikes, land speeders and predators, the chapter instead deployed whirlwinds and assault marines. It became a common tactic to scatter enemy infantry with artillery fire before assault marines flew in on jump packs to strike their downed foes. Most uniquely, the Alchemists maintained use of 2 roles that had gone out of use since the Great Crusade. Breacher squads and Previans have remained a highly respected position within the chapter's formation. Breaches made it possible for lines to progress, while their heavy combat shields offer great protection from ghost shots. Previans differ from their Great Crusade function more greatly. Only one Previan exists at a time, effectively acting as captain of the Tech Marines. Tech Marines and Apothecaries are both widely respected roles in the Alchemists, and their restorative abilities allowed the war to continue for far longer than they would otherwise have managed. Despite their durability, attrition was costly for the Alchemists and may have seen the death of the chapter. Paracelsus decided the best strategy was to seal the Necrons underground, although how to accomplish this was initially unclear. This was until the scout teams were able to uncover an archaeotech bomb abandoned by the planet's Mechanicus overlords in days gone by. The Alchemists would eventually gather their forces for a final push to close the catacombs. Dreadnoughts and their last surviving Land Raider led the way through the Necron line, with Terminator squads following behind. This heavy infantry would protect the bomb, concealed as it was in the interior of a Razorback transport. The march was costly, but the Alchemists made it into the cabins in which the Xenos had been uncovered. Upon arrival, Paracelsus and a Breacher squad pulled the bomb of the wreckage of the destroyed Razorback, then entered the heart of the catacombs and rigged the bomb to explode. In their run for the surface, their route was blocked by hordes of flayed ones. Unable to escape before detonation, they were buried beneath rubble as the catacombs fell apart. In the days following the collapse of the cavern, the alchemists began cautiously to shift through the rubble, searching for their chapter master's remains. After 4 days, their best hopes were exceeded when Rylan Paracelsus was found alive, albeit in coma. The bodies of the breachers had taken the bulk of the damage, perhaps as some last effort by the men to protect their chapter master. The alchemists interred him within the sarcophagus of a Leviathan dreadnought. Since those days, Paracelsus rarely rises from his long slumber. While most of the business of governing the chapter is left to other marines, he is a great tactician and weapon of war in his own right. When he awakens, no mercy is shown to the chapter's enemies. Unfortunately, the Necrons on the surface of Morrigan did not shut down immediately. Nonetheless, the genocidal conquest of the planet faltered as they ceased to move forward. Without further instruction, the aliens simply maintained position and developed their own territory, not attacking humans unless the human came within their sights. These machines still operate across much of the planet, joining the Chaos Demons as a hazard of Morrigan that can never be completely dealt with. Nonetheless, the war is considered a victory by the Morrigan natives and, to a lesser extent, the Alchemists. The Astartes had lost 2/3 of their number, but had also established a place for them to rebuild. Rather than construct their own fortress ministry, they claimed the Spire, a mechanical structure in the mountains. This location had been scoured of life by the Necrons, and the chapter secluded themselves there. To rebuild, the Space Marines would have to bolster their numbers. This was something not attempted since being declared renegade. Due to the physical threat of the planet, the local population were considered an ideal source for strong recruits. An arrangement was made between the alchemists and the natives, with the Astartes offering assistance in slaying the worst of the demons, heretical cults and necron monsters. In exchange, some of the strongest male children would be offered up to join the chapter. Indeed, the superstitious natives actively seek that their children should join the chapter. This is because they believe Astartes conversion to be a result of the elixir of life, so those children that are chosen will live forever. However, the process of creating new alchemists proved to be considerably more difficult than it at first seemed. This was on account of the chapter's gene seed, which seemed to be prone to rejection and mutation once placed into an aspirant. The precise reason for this is as unclear as the chapter's origin. It has been theorized that this is linked to their lack of confirmed Primarch, some speculating that they may be descendant from an unstable source. Others believe that the prolonged time in warp travel corrupted their gene stocks in a similar way to the gene stocks of heretic space marines. This hypothesis is popular among those who view the alchemists as an ultramarine successor, although even amongst this community it is not universally believed. Some scholars point to the fact that even Ultramarines' gene seed has a 10% chance for mutation. These radical thinkers speculate that at the dividing of the legions, Gilliman found it more practical to put his genetic deviants together in one isolated chapter. This latter theory is widely derided and seen as heretical. Whatever the case, the need to stabilize their gene seed has been a long struggle for the alchemists. It is for this reason that they have such a large amount of apothecaries. The effects of the alchemist gene seed have never been studied in depth by anyone outside the chapter. What is known is that those marines that survive implantation become quiet, practical, and often philosophical individuals, although this may simply be the culture the chapter adopts. It was during their period of reconstruction that changes to their structure were made. The librarians would become much larger than that of other chapters, as Psyche children were often put forward for Astartes training. This proved useful partially for the tactical advantage the librarians represent, but also due to the chapter custom of dual ranks. In one of several deviations from the Codex Astartes, captains are usually selected from the librarians, apothecarian, or armory. This is due to their beliefs that only the most rational should be trusted to lead. Due to the consistently small size of the chapter, each company is adapted to serve multiple roles in any given combat situation. First company is comprised of veterans, but all other companies comprise of tactical, devastator, assault, breacher, and scout marines. The role of breacher squads has always been dangerous and is usually taken up after serving in a tactical squad. why some men are assigned to be in this role while others are not is unknown. The temperament of breachers differs from their kin, tending to be more aggressive and more willing to run into danger. It is possible that this behavior is encouraged, but it is equally likely to be an eventual side effect of their degrading gene seed. The Alchemists have no company marking. By M40, the Alchemists had accumulated 600 Astartes, 2 ships, and an admirable ratio of victories to defeats. While Paracelsus slept, their de facto chapter master was the bold first captain Igor. Igor was a rarity among captains, as he had not been selected from any other specialized role. Nonetheless, under his leadership, the chapter would push forward on unsubtle campaigns to defeat the Emperor's enemies. This drew criticism from second captain and chief librarian Aldon Alcehast. Alcehast was quick to point out that Igor had been born on Morrigan and had never known the wrath of the Inquisition. Later on in this millennia, Ultima Segmentum would be blighted by a series of raids coordinated between the 3rd and 20th Legiones Astartes. This was believed to include a warband containing the infamous apothecary Fabius Bile. The Alchemists' flagship, the Banshee, found the aftermath of an Emperor's Children raid by chance, immediately summoning the strike cruiser Dullahan for support. This made for a force of 590 Astartes, who then began pursuing the Emperor's Children into the warp. This drawn-out pursuit had been attributed to the ambition of Igor to slay the Clone Lord. A less charitable interpretation has been that the chapter intended to capture Bile. Although it is purely speculation, some believe the Alchemists wanted Bile to stabilize their gene seed. Whatever the reason, they pursued them to Tremoran, a minor hive planet. 2 months prior to the arrival of the Emperor's Children, a Slaanesh cult had revealed itself on the world and begun a guerrilla war with the local PDF. A force of Adeptus Sororitas from the Order of the Argent Shroud was sent to purge the heretics. The Astartes and Sororitas arrived at Tremoran within 2 days of each other, the latter informing the Inquisition of the renegade's presence. Argent Shroud forces were confident they could deal with the Alchemists. Despite this, the Inquisition ordered reinforcements to the system. The Charnel Guard and Flesh Eater Space Marine chapters were hand-picked for this task. Captain Alcest advised that the Alchemists should retreat to avoid the arriving Imperials. Igor rejected his concerns as cowardly and ordered that the mission should continue. With Tremoran engulfed in a planet-wide dust storm, it was impossible to tell for certain where the heretics had landed. It was concluded that the Alchemist would send a group to the planet's only hive city, a place by the name Bailoff, to crush the heretical cult. Not long after landing, the ground forces were ambushed by another group of Astartes. While the Alchemists had been prepared for a direct conflict with the Emperor's Children, they were not prepared for the attack that came. From 5 different directions, the Alpha Legion launched simultaneous assaults. Having disguised themselves as Emperor's Children in their raids, the 20th Legion had led the Alchemists into their trap. From fortified positions prepared months previously, the Havocs of the 20th Legion fired their heavy weapons at the disoriented chapter. With the storm obscuring their vision, the Alchemists remained uncoordinated while sustaining heavy losses. Against the wishes of the Adeptus Sororitas, the Imperial Astartes deployed before formulating a true plan. Drop pods of Channel Guard launch fell first into the Strait of Bailoff. This was followed by a large deployment of assault marines from the Flesh Eaters. With their hand forced, Sororitas joined the attack, firing their bolt weapons from a distance. After centuries of hiding, conflict between the Imperium and the Alchemists had finally come to pass. Operating under the orders of the High Lords of Terror, the Loyalist forces made no distinction between the Alchemists and the Alpha Legion. Eventually, the cultists of Slaanesh would make themselves known in Bailoff. Some unknown signal from the Alpha Legion sent the heretics howling into the din of battle. This mass sacrifice of mortal followers, along with the already substantial loss in Astartes' gene seed and Sororitas warriors, would be revealed as a part of an unholy ritual. A warp tear opened up above the streets of Bailoff, conjured by the Prince of Excess himself. In the blink of an eye, vile yet alluring demons appeared to add to the carnage on the streets. Almost as quickly, a ship of Emperor's Children passed through the warp gate, deploying noise marines into the fray. Aboard the ship was the true Fabius bile, with its many horrifying experimental organisms. Whether or not the Third Legion knowingly went along with the scheme of the 20th is unclear. What is known is that following their summoning, the Alpha Legion withdrew its attack on Alcest's forces, leaving the other factions on the planet to fight among themselves. Following the arrival of the Emperor's children, conflict between the Alchemists and Imperial forces broke down almost immediately. While no alliance was made, both factions realized that this fresh wave of chaos had become the biggest threat. Already scattered and battle-weary, the Charnel Guard and Flesh-Eaters ordered their surviving men to retreat and regroup. In contrast, the Alchemists and the Argent Shroud held their positions against the heretics. Captain Igor was slain, blown apart by the sonic blast of a noise marine, his hubris costing him his life. In a dangerous gambit, Captain Alcest re-equipped himself with a jump pack and decided to attempt to board the heretic ship. Along with 10 assault marines, he attempted to enter into the enemy's docking bay. Once inside, the strike team fought through Bile's minions to the bridge of the vessel. There, they forced the ship down, crashing it into the city. In doing this, they killed many civilians and even their own warriors, but crippled the heretics' ability to attack. Alcest, the only alchemist to survive the crash, then sought out Bile. He found the heretic, who was buried under rubble, and put a bolt round through his head. While the primogenitor would live on through another clone, Alcest is being quoted as saying he took a great deal of satisfaction from the event. While the fighting continued throughout the following weeks, rather than face the wrath of the Flesh-Eaters and Charnel Guard for a second time, the Alchemists surrendered themselves to the Argent Shroud. This risk was seen as the only opportunity the Alchemists had to survive. Rather than simply executing their Astartes, the sororities accepted their surrender, perhaps realizing they had not become slaves to chaos. The Alchemists were held prisoner of the sororities' flagship until they were handed over to the Inquisition. Less than 100 Astartes remained of the original Alchemists' forces that were sent to Tremoron. While before the Imperium had simply wanted them destroyed, their existence was no longer a myth. Widespread corruption still led to the exterminatus of Tremoron, but the Alchemists' action allowed the evacuation of some of the local population. Having proven their mettle against the Emperor's children and surrendered to the sororities, the chapter were no simple heretics. Instead of execution, the Alchemists would be incarcerated until further notice. The chapter were transported to an undisclosed location in Segmentum Solar. Once there, they were placed into an inducted stasis. When Robuti Gilliman returned to the Imperium over 1,000 years later, he would venture to Terra before announcing the Indomitus Crusade. For this campaign, Gilliman gathered all the armies he had at his disposal. It was during this time that he learned of the Alchemists, their stasis mirroring his own, albeit for a far shorter period. Gilliman ordered that Aldon Alcest be brought out of stasis for a personal meeting. While a conversation between a Primarch and the commander of such a small force was expectedly brief, it changed the fate of the Alchemists. What was discussed is a mystery, but when it was over, they were no longer fugitives. Instead, it was decided that the Alchemists would join the Crusade, although without full autonomy. Due to their small size, as well as their density of apothecaries and tech marines, they would operate as a support cadre for other chapters. This went completely against their highly individualistic fighting style, but this was considered part of penitence for past crimes. Throughout the Long Crusade, the Alchemists were stationed primarily alongside Ultramarine successors and chapters of unknown founding. Blood Angel's successors were never stationed with the Alchemists due to their conflict on Tremoron. Likewise, the Raven God were also blacklisted, as the Carcharodons and Death Eagles were both prominent hunters of the Alchemists during their exile. The Unforgiven flatly refused to serve alongside the Alchemists, while the Iron Hounds saw no rational need to take a support cadre. The Sons of Dawn were divided, with the Crimson Fists and Celestial Lions successfully serving the chapter. In sharp contrast, the Black Templars and Deathstrike hated the Alchemists for their history as renegades and for the chapter's betrayal of the Deathstrike in past millennia. Mutual dislike existed between the newly founded Sons of the Phoenix and the Alchemists. The former believed that the Alchemists were overly serious, while the latter believed the Sons were guilty of hubris. Descendants of Jekatai Khan and Lehman Ross were also disliked by the Alchemists, who they view as barbaric and overly simplistic in tactics. The Alchemists never came into contact with the Salamanders. Gilliman has never acknowledged the Alchemists as his sons, which has not stopped it from being speculated. In truth, the chapter seems to have no particular friends except for the forces that they admire from a tactical disposition. Before the end of the campaign, Gilliman sent word that the Alchemists had proven their loyalty and would be released from the crusade. Returning the Banshee to Morrigan, the chapter would be surprised to find a full 3 companies of reinforcements. These new Astartes had been created and trained by the few warriors left on Morrigan during their absence. The chapter is currently made up of around 3/4 of standard Astartes to 1/4 of Primaris. Whether the Primaris will save the chapter from their gene seed flaws is something only time will tell. In the meantime, the chapter master has declared they have spent too long fighting in the shadows. The full might of the Alchemists will soon be deployed across the galaxy, whenever and wherever the Emperor requires.